They designed the game to keep you boxed in, confident that you would never move beyond the limits they set. They wrote the script with you as the expendable character, someone destined to fade out before the story reached its climax. They made assumptions about your endurance, about your ability to bend reality to your will. What they forgot is that pressure doesn't always break people. Sometimes it sharpens them. You let them believe they were in control. You allowed their arrogance to swell until it blinded them. And then you moved in a way that rewrote every page they thought was already written. The impossible didn't come from luck. It came from patience, from watching their hands shake as they realized the plan they built wasn't strong enough to cage you. There's a psychology to proving people wrong without speaking a word. They expect resistance to look loud, messy, and chaotic. They expect you to fight fire with fire, hoping your emotions would expose cracks they could use against you. Instead, you became the opposite of what they prepared for. You became still, methodical, frighteningly calm in the face of their chaos. That calmness unnerved them more than rage ever could. They kept waiting for you to break character, for the mask to fall, for the desperation to reveal itself. It never did. What they didn't understand was that the power was never in reacting. The power was in creating a reality so undeniable that their doubts dissolved into silence. Their plan relied on you quitting early. They bet on fatigue, on distraction, on your hunger for validation to make you fold. They thought the clock was their weapon, but you understood that endurance is a greater force than speed. You moved with a rhythm that made time your ally, not your enemy. Every step forward was proof that their expectations were flawed. Every refusal to stop was a reminder that you were not part of their equation anymore. They didn't see that by placing limits on you, they had already set limits on themselves. They underestimated you, and in doing so, they overestimated their own strength. When you pulled off the impossible, it wasn't just a victory. It was a collapse of the entire structure they built on illusions. They believed authority, numbers, and noise could stand against quiet certainty. They believed the collective opinion of the crowd would drown you out. Instead, you rose without asking for permission, without needing applause, and the crowd shifted its gaze naturally. That was the part that terrified them most. They didn't just lose control of you, they lost control of the people watching. The impossible you pulled off was not just breaking through. It was showing everyone else that the walls were never real to begin with. The most dangerous thing you ever did was prove possibility, where they insisted there was none. They thought the line between them and you was permanent. They thought they could keep you playing small, begging for scraps, chasing recognition. You proved that the line was drawn in sand, and you stepped over it with ease. Once someone sees that impossible barriers can be crossed, it changes the way they look at every obstacle. That's the gift you gave others, even if you didn't intend to. You became the living contradiction to every excuse they used to keep people in place. That contradiction spreads like fire, and no plan can contain it. They will never admit it, but deep down they admired what you did. They hated it because it exposed them, but they admired it because it was something they could never achieve. They wanted to control perception, but you controlled reality. They wanted to decide how far you could go, but you shattered their map and created your own path. That contrast is the reason they whisper your name in frustration. They thought their strategy was airtight. They thought their influence was enough. Now, all they have is the bitter memory of a moment they couldn't stop, a moment that left them feeling powerless against someone they had dismissed. The impossible always begins with disbelief. They called you foolish, unrealistic, reckless. They laughed when you started, rolled their eyes when you kept going, and ignored you when you endured. But disbelief is fragile. It cracks when results appear. It shatters when outcomes prove undeniable. Their plan didn't include your resilience, and that was their fatal mistake. They assumed the limits they placed on themselves also applied to you. They assumed you would collapse under the same weight that broke them. They didn't realize you had already built yourself in silence, brick by brick, so that when the moment came, their weight wasn't enough to crush you. Your greatest weapon wasn't force, it was clarity. You knew exactly where you were headed, even if the path wasn't obvious to anyone else. They mocked you for chasing what they thought was impossible, but you didn't need their validation. You needed only to stay consistent. That clarity became the blade that cut through their plan, leaving them scrambling, trying to explain how you managed to escape the trap they designed. They called it luck. They called it timing. But you knew better. It wasn't luck. It was inevitability disguised as patience. When you pull off the impossible, you change more than the outcome. You change the entire definition of what's possible. Their plan was designed to cage your ambition, to make you smaller than your potential. Now they're left staring at a reality they swore couldn't exist. Their structure, their control, their narrative, all reduced to rubble in the shadow of your proof. That's why they fear you now. Because once you've shown that impossible is possible, they can never put you back in the box. Every shady character believes the mask will save them. They put effort into polishing their act, into crafting the perfect illusion that hides their weakness. They think if they smile just right, laugh at the right moments, or speak with enough confidence, no one will ever question what lies beneath. But masks can only work when the audience is distracted. You stopped being distracted. You stopped listening to their rehearsed words and started watching the little things. The way their hands twitched, the way their eyes darted, the way silence made them uneasy. That was when you saw it. The mask wasn't real power. The mask was desperation. It was glued to their face by fear, and their trembling hand was the only thing keeping it from falling apart. They feared your gaze more than anything. Not your anger, not your words, not even your victories. It was the way you could look at them and see through the act. They had built their entire life around performance, and performance only works when the audience plays along. You didn't play along. You refused to clap for the illusion, refused to nod at the lines they rehearsed. Instead, you studied. You took your time, let them talk, let them weave their web. Then you pulled the thread, not with rage, but with quiet recognition. And in that moment, their fear exploded. Because you weren't reacting to their mask. You were staring straight at the trembling hand they thought no one would ever notice. Shady people crave control, but their control is fragile. They depend on others not asking questions, not paying attention, not seeing the cracks. That's why your silence terrifies them more than confrontation ever could. When you don't argue, when you don't defend, when you simply observe, it feels like a spotlight burning into their act. Their mask begins to feel heavy, harder to keep in place, and the hand that holds it starts to shake. Every shady character fears the person who doesn't get fooled, because once you see the hand, the mask no longer has power. In relationships, the mask is often charm. They act like they care more than they do, pretend loyalty they'll never honor, promise futures they have no intention of building. But charm fades the moment you test it against consistency. You stopped listening to what they said and started measuring what they did. That shift was lethal to their game, because charm can only carry them so far before reality demands proof, and proof is something they can never provide. You didn't have to expose them loudly. You just had to stop buying into the act. The absence of belief was enough to shake them. In friendships, the mask is often loyalty. They pretend they're on your side, swear they'll stand with you, but only when it benefits them. The moment it costs them something, they disappear. You began noticing how they always showed up in the light but vanished in the dark. That was when you saw the hand tremble. Their loyalty wasn't love, it was convenience. And when you stopped calling on them, when you stopped expecting, their entire mask crumbled. They weren't offended by your distance. They were terrified that you finally saw what they were trying to hide. In life, shady characters think survival is about pretending to be bigger than they are. They inflate their stories, exaggerate their wins, lie about their strength. But lies always demand energy to maintain. Truth doesn't. You watch them pour energy into maintaining their image, and you chose the opposite. You built something solid, something unshakable, something that required no mask. That contrast alone exposed them. They couldn't stand beside you without trembling because your reality made their illusion look paper thin. Psychologically, masks are fragile because they depend on fear. They fear being ordinary, fear being powerless, fear being seen for what they really are. And the hand that holds the mask trembles because deep down, they know one wrong move will expose them. You didn't need to tear the mask away. You just needed to hold steady until they revealed themselves. Fear makes people sloppy, and the trembling hand always betrays the act. They couldn't hide forever because masks are heavy, and desperation is impossible to disguise forever. The beauty of seeing through a mask is that you no longer carry the weight of confusion. You stop asking why they did what they did. You stop trying to understand contradictions. You stop hoping the mask might be the truth. You accept that the trembling hand is the reality, and that clarity frees you. They lose control the moment you stop questioning yourself and start questioning them. And nothing terrifies a shady character more than someone who no longer doubts their own perception. The end of their plan always looks the same. They wanted to be admired, respected, feared, or loved through the mask. They never planned for you to see the hand. They never prepared for someone who refused to be hypnotized by their illusion. Once you noticed the trembling, once you locked eyes with the weakness they carried, the entire performance collapsed. They had no script for that scene, no backup plan. And that's why every shady character fears you, because you don't just break the mask, you expose the fear keeping it alive. The cruelest part of gaslighting was never the arguments, the twisted words, or even the manufactured stories. The true cruelty was the way it chipped away at your ability to trust yourself. They didn't just want to control your decisions. They wanted to own the way you saw reality itself. Every denial, every manipulation, every false narrative was aimed at making you question the ground beneath your feet. Once you stopped trusting your own senses, your own memory, your own judgment, you became easier to bend. They thrived on that erosion. They didn't need to destroy you outright. They only needed to make you second, guess yourself enough that you would start leaning on them for clarity. That dependency was their weapon. They counted on you, forgetting that your inner compass was once strong. They knew if they could distort it long enough, you would stop checking the direction you were walking and simply follow their lead. They played the role of authority, painting themselves as the rational one while branding your instincts as flawed. The more you gave in, the more power they gained. Their entire empire was built on the foundation of your doubt, but what they never accounted for was the fact that self-trust can be rebuilt. It doesn't return in one grand moment. It returns in small, stubborn steps, a quiet decision, a boundary upheld, a thought you refuse to dismiss. Each of those acts is a stone placed back in the wall they tried to tear down. The day you start rebuilding that self-trust is the day their grip begins to weaken. At first, they notice it in subtle ways. You stop explaining yourself so much. You stop asking them to confirm your reality. You start standing longer in silence without rushing to defend your perspective. That unsettles them, because they realize the dependency they worked so hard to engineer is slipping. When you begin to trust yourself again, their gaslighting loses its effect. They can twist words, but they can no longer twist your core. That is when the mask of control starts cracking on their side. Gaslighters thrive on the illusion of authority. They want you to believe they see the truth better than you do. They wear down your mind until even obvious facts feel hazy. But rebuilding self-trust means reclaiming the right to your own perception. It means saying, I know what I saw, I know what I felt, I know what happened. That statement alone shakes them, because their power never came from being right. It came from making you believe you were wrong. The moment you stop surrendering that belief, their game collapses. Their strength was never real. It was borrowed from your own self-doubt. Think of how dangerous you become when your trust in yourself returns. Every attempt to manipulate falls flat. Every attempt to rewrite events feels pathetic. They sense it, too. Their voice gets louder. Their tactics get messier. They scramble because the leash they once wrapped around your mind is snapping. That is why rebuilding self-trust is not just healing. It is warfare. It is the quiet reclaiming of territory they thought they had conquered for good. And once you take that land back, they can no longer stand on it. They don't simply disappear because you cut them off. They disappear because they lose relevance. Once you no longer need them to confirm your experiences, they have nothing left to offer. Once you no longer lean on them for direction, they become background noise. You don't even need to announce their irrelevance. It shows in the way you move. Your walk becomes firmer, your voice steadier, your eyes clearer. Gaslighters are allergic to clarity. It exposes them for what they always were, fragile pretenders afraid of someone who can stand without leaning. The cruelest part of gaslighting was always the silence it planted in your mind, the hesitation before speaking, the doubt before acting, the pause before trusting yourself. That silence was the echo of their manipulation. But when you begin to rebuild, that silence starts to fade. In its place comes certainty, not loud, but steady. You begin to realize you don't need permission to believe yourself. That realization is what makes their power evaporate. They cannot survive in a world where you choose your own voice over theirs. Rebuilding self-trust doesn't just heal the wound. It sharpens you. You learn to read people differently. You notice the signs of manipulation faster. You recognize the patterns before they sink their claws in. The pain they caused becomes armor, not weight. You stop giving your trust away so easily, but you also stop abandoning it within yourself. They tried to teach you that your perception was the enemy. You transformed that perception into your weapon. They always thought confusion was their greatest victory. They didn't see that clarity was your greatest revenge. Clarity requires no shouting, no performance, no spectacle. It is in the way you simply know and stand firm. When you reach that place, gaslighters can no longer operate. They disappear not because you fight them, but because you outgrow the game they designed. They disappear because they no longer have a role in a life that trusts itself. Toxicity does not walk into your life with a roar. It seeps in like water through cracks. It waits for weakness, waits for silence, waits for the moment you leave your door unguarded. Boundaries are the walls that hold it back, and when you fail to build those walls, poison finds its way in. They test you once, you let it slide. They test you again, you stay quiet. By the third time, the toxin has already rooted itself in your system. What started as a small invasion becomes a lifestyle. They get bolder and you get quieter. That is how toxicity flourishes, not because it is strong, but because you gave it room to grow unchecked. They were never powerful. They were opportunistic. They noticed when you avoided confrontation, when you kept the peace at the expense of your own sanity, when you gave more chances than anyone deserved. That was their opening. Poison cannot thrive in healthy flesh. It needs an open wound. Your hesitation became that wound. Your longing for acceptance became that wound. Your fear of losing people became that wound. They fed on it, multiplied within it, and turned what should have been a relationship into a battlefield. The irony is that you thought giving more would heal the connection. Instead, it only made the poison spread faster. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are survival. They create lines that protect you from invasion, walls that stop manipulation before it begins. Toxic people despise boundaries because boundaries expose them. They cannot flourish in an environment where the rules are clear, where respect is non-negotiable. That is why they prefer those who say yes too often, those who hesitate to say no, those who sacrifice their own needs just to be liked. You once gave them that environment, and they used it against you. The moment you started drawing the line, the poison reacted. It screamed, it protested, it called you selfish. But the truth was simpler. They were just losing the garden they had been allowed to infest. Think of every time you ignored the early signs, the jokes that cut too deep, the apologies that felt rehearsed, the excuses that always came too easy. Those were drops of poison. They didn't look deadly at first, but over time they weakened your system. Toxicity thrives in that slow burn. They rely on you convincing yourself it isn't serious yet, that maybe it will get better, that you can endure a little longer. They win when you normalize the poison in your veins. That is why your recovery begins the moment you stop minimizing it and admit what it is. Poison cannot be managed. It has to be purged. Boundaries stop the spread by cutting off the supply. When you tell them no, when you distance yourself, when you stop giving them the reaction they crave, the poison starves. Toxicity is not self-sustaining. It feeds on your energy, your attention, your willingness to let it pass. When you stop offering those things, it withers. They will rage, they will guilt, they will attempt to claw their way back in, but that desperation is proof of how much they needed your silence to survive. You never needed them. They needed your absence of boundaries to keep existing in your world. You once believed love could cure toxicity. That belief was your open wound. You poured kindness into people who twisted it. You gave patience to people who weaponized it. You offered forgiveness to people who never earned it. All it did was train them to dig deeper, to take more, to assume they would always be forgiven. They never respected your love because it was given without conditions. Love without boundaries is not love, it is surrender. And surrender is the soil where poison blooms. The moment you learned to love yourself enough to draw limits, everything changed. Psychologically, poison spreads in people who doubt themselves. Toxicity thrives when you question your worth, when you think you need to earn space, when you undervalue your own perspective. That is why rebuilding self-trust matters. A mind that trusts itself recognizes poison instantly. A heart that trusts itself doesn't beg for approval. Toxic people sense this. They look for those who hesitate, who second-guess, who believe they must shrink in order to keep peace. The stronger your self-trust, the stronger your boundaries. And the stronger your boundaries, the more their poison dries up in the sun of your certainty. They never expected you to change. They expected you to keep swallowing the poison until you became numb. But when you began pulling it out, when you began saying no, when you started rebuilding the walls, the game shifted. They called you cold. They called you arrogant. They accused you of betrayal. None of it was true. What they really meant was that you were no longer easy prey. You were no longer an open wound. And without that wound, their toxicity had nowhere to live. The cruelest truth for them is that they cannot survive in the presence of someone who refuses to bleed for them anymore. They only ever thrived in your absence of boundaries. The moment you filled those spaces, the moment you closed the wounds, they had no more access. They vanish not because you fight them, but because you refuse to host them. And that is the ultimate revenge, not anger, not bitterness, but the quiet removal of space where poison once lived. Those who betray are masters of rewriting the script. They cannot stand in the mirror and admit what they did, so they twist the language itself. They will tell you loyalty is an illusion, that nobody really means what they say, that promises are just words people use in the moment. They say these things because honesty has always been foreign to them. They never lived by it, so they assume no one else does either. They call your loyalty naïve, your honesty foolish, your trust childish. What they cannot admit is that you expose them simply by being consistent. They flinch at real loyalty because it highlights the weakness of their own nature. And so, betrayal becomes their language, denial their defense, and projection their shield. When you stayed true, it unsettled them. Betrayers prefer the company of liars and pretenders because in that world, their actions feel justified. But when someone walks in with clear honesty and unwavering loyalty, it shakes their mask. You didn't need to accuse them. Your presence alone showed the difference between what's real and what's false. That's why they tried so hard to discredit loyalty itself. They couldn't admit they failed at it, so they tried to make it seem like it doesn't exist. That was never about truth. It was about survival. They needed to poison the word so you would doubt your own principles. But while they dismissed loyalty as fantasy, you lived it as reality. Betrayers always view honesty as a tool, never as a code. They speak truth only when it serves them, never when it costs them. That is why they will always see loyalty as conditional, because in their world, everything is transactional. They expect people to betray eventually, because that is what they would do. And when you don't, they call you fake, because they cannot understand anyone who doesn't mirror their nature. This is the psychology of betrayal. They project their dishonesty onto everyone around them to avoid facing their reflection. They claim honesty was never real, because in their own language, it never was. You learned that betrayal is not always about the act itself. It is about the way they justify it afterward. They cannot just admit they broke something valuable. They must convince you the value never existed in the first place. When they lie to your face and then blame you for believing them, it reveals the true depth of their corruption. It isn't the betrayal that kills trust. It's the way they poison your memory of everything good. But here is where their plan fails. The fact they have to rewrite the meaning of loyalty proves it exists. If it didn't, they wouldn't need to deny it so violently. In relationships, betrayal often comes wrapped in excuses. They will tell you everyone lies. They will say monogamy is unrealistic. They will call loyalty a fairy tale designed for the weak. These are not statements of truth. These are confessions of inability. They could not hold to the standard, so they pretend the standard was never real. You, however, didn't build your foundation on illusions. You built it on action, on consistency, on honesty even when it was inconvenient. That difference is what broke them. They could live in deception until someone like you came along and revealed how thin their excuses were. There is always a trembling in a betrayer's defense. Their words may sound bold, but there's desperation behind them. They need you to believe loyalty is an illusion, because if you don't, then their betrayal stands as evidence of their failure. Betrayal only looks powerful when trust is weak. But when you rebuild self-trust, when you anchor yourself in your own principles, their betrayal becomes a reflection of them, not you. They tried to drag you into their distorted language, but you learned to speak in actions that could never be bent. That is why they fear you. You are fluent in a language they cannot fake.